This time on the Prop Master, well, you get to see what it looks like when I don't know what to do. Oh, and we're going to put all these nice little Greebles all over here. So that's good. So yeah, we finally get to put all the little pieces on here and get this into its final configuration. And we're also going to do a little bit of soldering so that we can get this light to work. But I can't let you go just yet because I still need to ask you to go ahead and subscribe and like this video. It doesn't really hurt you to do any of that stuff, but it really, really helps the channel a lot. Also, like I've said many times before, I'm trying to get to a point where I can do some things that I can only do according to YouTube when I get 30,000 subscribers. So only about 7% of you have subscribed to the channel. So I've got some work to do on that. So please subscribe. And if you like the video, like it. Kind of rambling on here, so we better get to work. Okay, so if you're wondering why it's taken so long for this video to come out, it's because I don't know what to do. I have finally come up with sort of a plan that I think is going to work. It's not 100% figured out, but we're going to go ahead and go with it. So here's our pieces, and if you'll notice, I did, with some great difficulty, pry this piece off of there. One of the problems that I've been having is that I've caused myself some heartache right now by some choices that I made earlier. One of the big ones is attaching this onto here already. Let's not forget the piece that we just finished up here. So we have the basic piece right here, but now we need the little Greebles that go with it. And I've got some links down below that will tell you exactly where I got all of these pieces. The first one is some little switch here that looks like it came off of an old Atari game system, which I guess would be about the right time period. Got some momentary switches, which are very accurate to what they should be in the movie, but they're the wrong color, so we'll have to paint those. I tried spray painting it and painting it with a brush, and they both worked fine. I've also got this this light here. It looks very accurate to the piece. I got a lot of these. Spent a lot of time hunting for these. Found some of them on the dented helmet, which was really helpful. This, from working with it, I think is probably an actual incandescent bulb. I do not believe this is an LED because it works no matter which positive or negative I put these on. It works either way, so I'm thinking it's not an LED. It's probably an actual old incandescent bulb. So here we have this. And last but not least, you're going to need the keyboard from an old Casio calculator from the 70s. Good luck with that. This is a casting that I got on Etsy, which I'll of course give you a link to find that. There's also some other ways if you might want to go. It's up to you. Nothing here was particularly expensive. None of these pieces were over $6 altogether. You know, with shipping and everything, depending on how much of a hurry you're in, I'm sure you could get all of this stuff for $25. Now, like I said, I had to pry these two pieces apart, and if you're following along with me building yours, I really apologize. I think you don't have to take it apart, but it's going to make things a lot easier. If you're going to take it apart, I would suggest getting like a putty knife and just very slowly pushing it in there and very slowly prying it apart. You have to remember that a lot of this other stuff is put together with hot glue or CA glue, and if you put a lot of pressure on here, you're going to start snapping things. So very gentle pressure over a long period of time will slowly peel these pieces apart. And then after that, I just went through there with my big razor knife and slowly sort of carved everything out of there so you don't have big chunks of hot glue on here. So it's not perfect, as you can see, but you know, it's fairly smooth. There's not big chunks of hot glue. So let's go ahead and get started on this. I'm trying to decide now where to start. I think let's go ahead and start with the hardest part, or not really the hardest part, but the most complicated part, which is going to be the switch right here and this light that goes right here. That's this piece and this piece. So let's clear everything else off of here. And you're going to want to be really careful with this because it really wants to roll off of the counters and chairs and stuff and smash this little piece off the end. I haven't done it with this one yet, but I've done it with the others. This is a very weak piece of wood right now, and if it falls, it's going to break. So it's in danger until we get this mounted on here, and then it's kind of protected. This is one of the pieces that I've been sort of frustrated with for quite a while as far as how I wanted to go ahead and do it. There's several different versions of this that appear in the movie. You can definitely tell the ones that are just vacuum molded or vacuum formed because they've just got like a shallow square and a piece of plastic that sticks out the side. But I think the best thing that we can do, or that I can do for this, is I'm basically just going to glue this piece onto here. However, and this is one of the things that I've gone back and forth with several times, and that is, do I want this switch to turn on this light? And I don't. It's a difficult decision because you never see this light on in the movies. When I see the few close-up images I can see of it, I can actually see that there's some little flakes of gold paint on this light that make me feel like it's not supposed to be a light. It's supposed to be a red button that's there that's supposed to look like it's gotten some paint knocked off of it and exposing the silver below. But at the same time, if there's a light on, it's really going to add to the overall feeling that this is an actual electronic device. So after changing my mind about 10 times on this, I think I'm going to go ahead and wire this switch to where this switch will turn on this light. I believe this is supposed to be the trigger for the blaster up here. So I'm going to turn it to where it turns the light on when it's in the forward position so that it looks like it's still a trigger, but then the light will be on. So that's how we're going to do it. This is basically the circuit we're going to make. It's pretty simple. I tried several different batteries for this light, and the only thing that I could get to work was a 9-volt battery. So we're going to use a 9-volt on this. You might be able to use multiple other batteries to make it work, but to make things easier, I'm just going to use a 9-volt. And you can actually buy these little connectors for 9-volt batteries. I just take mine. Yeah, so I just stole mine out of this old stud finder that didn't work anymore. So I just cut mine out of that and use that one, which is why I've had to use a rubber band to keep it where it works well. But so turn it on and you do get a light. You can see that. We'll put that in the forward position, and then it turns off there. Now, if you'll notice, I did some other things to this to make it look a little bit better, which is pretty simple stuff. mostly just taking these two little flanges here where you would normally screw this in, and we're going to bend these. Take some pliers. Just want to start them to bending a little bit. Be sure not to damage your contacts down here. And now that they're bent a little bit, I can just kind of squeeze this and hopefully they'll fold right up. There we go. So now we have just a little box, which is going to work a little bit better for what we're doing. And when you wire this, on here you can see a little better maybe. What you want to wire is your negative to the middle post. Doesn't matter which side you use, top or bottom, but one in the middle and one to the front, both on the same side, top or bottom. Because the switch would normally go between, I think you can either have, you know, this contact on, or it's like an A-B switch. You got either A is on or B is on. I want it to be the forward switch on. So I've got the forward, the positive. Okay, so the positive comes from the battery through the light and then plugs into the forward-most pin. And we're going to do that on the bottom so that we can drill some holes in here and run the wires to the bottom. I know it's hard to follow the way I explained it, but it's a pretty simple circuit, and I'm sure you can handle it. If you don't care about this lighting up at all, then you can just cut all the pins off of here and just glue this straight onto the side piece right here. Okay, change of plan. Instead of doing something like this, we're going to make something like this. That way it's a little bit wider and or a little bit longer, more rectangular, and looks a little bit more like what's in the movie. So luckily I have several of these and I have one left. So let's go ahead and turn this into this. And it's pretty simple. We're just going to need some of that 1/4 inch, which is what, 6 millimeters roughly, Sintra that I used for the armor. You could also use wood for this if you have a 1/4 inch piece of wood. That would work just fine. Well, let's just start with cutting a strip that is 3/16 or 4.7 millimeters thick off of this piece right here, and I'll be right back. Okay, so here we have our little slice of the Sintra, and just gonna set this on here, and I want it to be a little bit bigger so that I can sand it flat. And so I'm gonna let that part stick out a little bit. I get that to focus. Here's the part where I usually forget to change that afterwards, but hopefully I will remember this time. So that's sticking out a little bit past, and I'm going to mark this just a little bit past. And I'm going to cut this out, and then I'll use this to mark another one and cut that one out as well. Okay, now I have these two small pieces here, and all I'm going to do is I'm going to take my switch here. I'm going to hold these up, you know, so that they fit pretty close to where they're supposed to be. I'm going to take a pair of pliers, and what the deal is there's where they punch this hole, there's a little bit of a threaded sleeve that sticks down where they punch that through and it kind of comes out. I'm assuming it's threaded, but I don't know for sure. I'm gonna hold this place, and I'm just going to squeeze this down so that that little sleeve cuts down into this part and leaves us a little. Let's see if I can. Okay, so you can see where that did that. And I'm going to repeat the process with this one. make sure that you use the opposite, don't do the same one twice, just in case they're not in the exact same place. So that's right there. Okay, so now we can just glue these into position. Do not use super glue on this, but you'll end up getting super glue inside the switch and your switch won't work. So this is a hot glue operation. Don't get me wrong, if you've got some of the really thick gel super glue or CA glue, you might be able to make it work. Just be real careful in your placement of it. Make sure that you get it all on the silver part and not any on the sides, because that'll go, what I've got is the real thin stuff. It'll get sucked right in there and glue your, it's probably going to glue this closed. So I'm going to use hot glue because I don't have any of the thick CA glue. And I'm just going to take, you should be able to get it to just kind of lock in place with the little divot that's already in there. There you go. So now that's how it's going to go. I'm going to put the hot glue on the top. Maybe I'll just put it here. And I left the register of this on the ground, so I know that's exactly how it's going to fit. When you push this through, it's going to go through the little hole. So I'll be ready for that. Do the same thing. I'm going to take this end. Okay, that lines up. I'm going to set it down in such a way that I can just pick it straight up and put it in place. Put just a little bit of glue on there. Kind of wipe off any extra. Okay. Ooh, almost got the hot glue in there and glued this together. That was surprising. So be very careful about that. Don't use too much glue or it will glue your switch. Okay, so I've just got my coarse 60 grit sanding stick here. And I'm just going to hold this on its side, and basically I'm just going to sand these little bits that stick out a little bit so that they're flush with the sides. And you can definitely kind of hear when it happens. I'm going to flip it over and do the same thing to the other side. Okay. Got a little bit more sticking up there. Okay, so that's all flush on the sides. Now I'm going to go ahead and I'm just going to round these corners off, just so they match the top of the metal here. Okay. Now what I'm going to do, and I'm going to pick which side of this I want this to be the, I want it to go this way. So basically I'm going to snip off all three of these contacts that are on the top. Snip them off as close as I can. Okay, and I'm going to put this like this. I want the on to be when it's all the way forward. So I'm going to leave these two forward contacts, and I'm going to remove this back contact down here. I think you can see that. Okay. And I'm going to take a little file and I'm just going to file those down flat. Okay. And I'm going to do the same thing on this one that I snipped off here. Okay. So now, if you can see, I've got, maybe this will help. See, I've got 2 contacts there. And those are the 2 that are going to be, when this is on, those will be the 2 that are activated. Now I want to just bend those. Okay, before I do that, I'm going to go ahead and this little piece of metal right here, I want to make sure this contact doesn't touch that when I bend it over. So I'm going to go ahead and make sure I file that down flat. You don't want to get too carried away where this thing falls apart on you, but you also don't want this to short out. Okay. Okay, now that this is all smooth down here, I'm not worried about this contact hitting that one when I bend it over. Let's see if I can get a little closer. Well, I'm just going to bend these 2 contacts to where they're sort of 90 degrees to where they are now. But I want to make sure that this does not touch that. Okay. So now we have these 2 pieces. I hope you can see this. So I've got these 2 pieces, they're bent to where they're facing this way. But they're nowhere near touching this metal part here. Okay, so now we have this, we can start dealing with some wiring. Okay, so I've measured from this corner right here 1 inch back. And I'm just going to put this, line this up with the line that I marked for 1 inch back. If I have to move this up a little bit. The light is terrible in here. Now what I want to do is I want to make a line. I'm kind of looking up underneath here where I can see those 2 contacts. I want to draw a line at each one of those contacts. Okay. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to drill a small hole almost in this corner, but lining up with these 2 marks that we just made. Okay, so I've got my drill, and I've got a drill bit here that is small, but not so small that this thin wire, you know, it's the same basic size as all your components have. And just make sure that it's, you know, small, but it's plenty big enough that your wire will go through easily. I don't want to give you a size because it kind of depends on what wire you have. This wire right here is doorbell wire, which was the smallest wire I could get at Home Depot. It comes in a it's not in the big spools. It's a small, not even really a spool, but like a, you know, it's just wrapped up. See if I can find it real quick. Just comes in this roll right here. It's like 50 or 60 feet of this stuff. Just for your doorbell. It's the, you know, everything else is substantially larger that you can get. If you went to a stereo store or an electronics shop, you could probably find plenty that's, you know, nice and small, thin like this. So now I'm just going to, I've got my marks here, and I'm just going to drill a couple of holes. If I could see, I would anyway. There we go. I'll do it right up against the edge. Make sure my fingers are out of the way. There's 1 and 2. These will go through no problem. Now we can go ahead and solder these wires to our switch. Okay, so I've got my very basic sort of solder setup here. these are like the cheapest helping hands you can find, except for they do have the magnifying glass, but in this case, I'm not going to worry about that. But I've got some, you don't have to use these, but it does help to have that extra little grab. So I'm going to go ahead and do I'm going to make the white the negative and red the positive. So I want the negative to be in the middle. Why? Just for me. It'll work no matter what you decide to do. I've got my simple little strippers here. I find these work a lot better on these thin little wires than do the more automated ones that grab and strip everything all at once, because they tend to break these little thin wires. And I just want to strip off a small section. And I'm just going to, there's a little hole in these connections. I'm just going to run this through the hole. This is really quite a stout little wire, but so run the hole and bend it back. Because this is so stout, I'm just going to try to squeeze it closed. I'm not going to try to wrap it around it. Okay. Okay, and I've got these so that it's pulling it, down along with the same direction as that. Okay. And I've got my soldering iron here, and I've got some solder. And I hate to instruct people on soldering because I've never had any problem with it, but I'm by no means any sort of expert on it. In fact, I do things probably wrong for a lot of people. I learned basic soldering in metal smithing, actually, so I kind of use that technique. Obviously use a torch there, but wherever the heat is where the solder will be drawn. So I tend to put the soldering iron on one end and the solder on the other side. I know that most people who do electronics don't do that, so it's probably not necessary. And is liable to overheat the electronics. I hope I'm not blocking the camera. The problem here is I said I've never had a problem soldering. I'm just going to take a look at it and see if I've actually soldered anything. No, I don't think I have. I've made a mess, but I haven't soldered anything yet. Okay. That, I'm pretty sure, is soldered. And I'm going to take a look at this and make sure it's not touching any other contacts on the switch. Okay, that looks pretty good. Let's go ahead and do the next one. Do the exact same thing. Run it through there, and I'm going to pinch it closed. Oh, and I've broken my switch. I got it too hot and I melted the hot glue, I think. So I'm going to glue this back on real quick and be right back. On second thought, I'm going to go ahead and make my solder and then solder my connection, and then I'll go back and glue that on so I don't just do the same thing over again. Let me grab the metal part. See if I can make this where you can see it. Now I'll try not to block everything. I'm feeling a fair amount of heat coming through the solder. I'm probably melting the center at this point. This is a new soldering iron and I'm not used to it. Finally. So I'm used to using this big old Western Electric thing that my dad had when he worked at a telephone company a million years ago. So I'm used to this big old honking thing. I'm not used to that little one. So let's take a look at this and make sure that nothing's touching. I didn't burn the center too badly. Okay, now I've just got some of this heat shrink tubing. I cut it in half. I'm going to push it over the solder connections. And this is just a lighter. It looks impressive, but it's just a lighter. Okay, so that should be good connections. I'm going to go ahead and hot glue this little piece back on and I'll be right back. Okay, I've got this hot glued back on. I've got my hot glue gun ready. So now I'm just going to take this piece and I'm going to feed it through the holes. Now when you drill those holes, you don't want it to be super tight because when you put the insulation, the little shrink insulation on there, that'll make it a little bit thicker. So if you made it super tight before, then it's not going to fit. So you need to make them a little bit wider than the wire. And speaking of wire, if you don't want to buy a big roll of wire, if you're going to buy the little pieces that your 9-volt battery attaches to, you're probably going to get, it'll be more than one, and you can always cut the wires off of that to use those as well, if you just don't want to spend the money for extra wire. Now when I do this, I want to make sure that this top lines up with the top here, not flush with the bottom here, because there's different angles there. So I just want to put some hot glue on here and line that up at the top. Not all the way at the top, but you know, sort of right in the middle. Now once I've done that, I want to kind of go around the whole thing. This is just going to help to secure it. And it'll also kind of look like it's welding, like it's been welded on there. I believe I've told you my secret to hot glue. If you rub your fingers together after you get it on there, it doesn't burn for some reason. And I also want to get quite a bit underneath here. That'll cover the wires as well as anything else. And once this dries, it'll be ready to go to the next step. So I've cleared everything off again, but don't unplug your hot glue gun. You're going to need it in a second. And go to this back section here. I just want to, I'm not going to be super precise, but I'm just going to mark what looks to be the middle, front to back, and side to side. Okay, that looks okay to me. I'm just going to take a sharp object of some kind and make a little dent. And I'm back with my drill. I've got a 1/4 inch bit here, which is 6.3 millimeters. The main thing is I want to have a hole that is just barely big enough for this shaft to go through, but not big enough for this little metal ring up here to go through. We're not going to use the nut or this lock washer. And pull those off. We're just going to use this little metal ring here. So let's go ahead and drill. Try to get as much of a 90-degree angle as you can to this. And we should be able to drop this in there. We have to pull this little pieces of insulation off. With any luck, this should fit in there, but not pull through, and it does. So now I'm just going to, well, let's not do that. Let's do this. I'm just going to put some hot glue in there and then push this through again. Doesn't have to be a lot. I'll end up having to clean the tips of those wires off, but that's okay. And then I'll go ahead and put some hot glue around the bottom of this piece here, holding it in place with my finger. And that should secure that in nicely. So we're done with the other part for a while. Let's go ahead and work on the flame unit here. You want to go ahead and measure from the tip here back 5.5 inches. That's like 14 centimeters. And you want to go for the middle of the piece. But more important than that, you want to make sure that you put a mark here, and then your next mark is the same distance from the edge. Ideally, you want that to be in the middle, but mine's clearly not. But the important thing is that they are the same distance apart. So from the tip back here to 5.5 inches, or 14 centimeters and make your mark. Now in my case, that's right here, and unfortunately that's right up against a wooden support that I have on the inside here. So I've got to move mine a 1/4 of an inch back. But from your first mark, you want to measure another 1.25 inches, which is 32 millimeters, and make your second mark, making sure that it is the same distance from this outside edge, because that's the important part, and make your mark. In my case, what I've done is I've had to move it a 1/4 inch back, so I've got a mark there, and then 1.25 inches down, I've got a mark here. Now once you have those marks made, you want to take something sharp and go ahead and punch those. And I'm doing this into that nylon, which is probably not the best stuff to try to make a mark in. Okay, and now I have my drill, and I've got a 9/32 bit, which is 7.1 millimeters. I think it's actually like 7.07, but I've rounded a little bit. The important thing is you want it to be just slightly bigger than the shaft here. Not the nut or anything, but the shaft on this little button here. But obviously not so big that it comes all the way through. You want the shoulder of the button to be, substantially larger, which shouldn't be a problem. So let's go ahead and drill those holes. I felt that move. This nylon is going to be a nightmare. I'm going to go ahead and try to punch that again. In fact, with this nylon, I may go with a smaller hole first. May go with a very small hole just to keep me from moving around so much. You won't have this problem because you won't be using this. You won't be using this terrible nylon material. Those are reasonably close. God. This nylon stuff is going to be the death of me. Great stuff for making bushings out of, not so great for making this. I'm going to have to glue this piece back together now. Of course, if this pulls the whole top off, that would solve my problem as far as getting to the bottom of this. Just got a little reamer here that'll clean those up a little bit. Now I have to decide whether or not I just want to rip the top off of this thing all together, or if I'm going to do this. Okay, I'm going to do this the way I would if, because if you're in the same boat as me, you may not, this may not just separate like this. So I'm going to go ahead and repair this, and then I'll be back and we'll go on with the process. That was pretty straightforward. Just held it apart, put some super glue in there, pushed it down, hit with zip kicker, and then just sanded everything smooth, and it's all good, solid and smooth, so no harm done. Now we can go on to the next part, which is we have to get access to the backside of these holes. This is where this would have been really handy to do this before assembling this whole thing. But you know, in case you were following along with me, you're in the same boat as me, and you have no access to that. My original thought was that I'll just be able to stick some little knobs on the top of this, just glue them straight on, but that's not the way it's going to work. Basically, I need access to get underneath and then screw this nut on the top. I tried just cutting the bottom off of a button, which works almost okay, but it just sticks up too high off of the deck there. So it really does need to come in from behind. If I cut this down any more than that, I mean, you could do that if you wanted the button to be completely static and not move at all, but it's kind of nice to have a little button that pushes. So what I'm going to have to do is basically cut a section of this out, which shouldn't be too much of a problem because this is all covered up by the main part of the Vambrace. And I think to do that, the best thing is going to be a Dremel tool with the cutting wheel. Probably don't really need to mark this, but it might be easier for you to see. So I'm going to try to come in right alongside of this wooden piece. And I want to come a little bit behind this hole here as well. I don't want to get all the way up to this edge because I want to leave some structure. And same goes to the bottom, so I'm going to leave a little room, top and bottom. And I'm going to cut that section out. So I'm going to use my Dremel with this cutting disc. And so I'm going to get my my little helmet that has the face protection. You just want to be really careful that you don't plunge down so deep that you start hitting the other side. I don't think that'll be a problem, but just something to keep in mind. Okay, I don't know if you saw me, but I kind of caught on that and it pulled up and dug a bit further up than I really wanted to, but I think it's going to be okay. Everything seems solid. Okay, now we have access to the underside of these holes, and we can go ahead and probably before we put these in, let's go ahead and spray paint a couple of them. Okay, so I've just got a empty box here, and I'm going to use my knife. I'm just going to cut a couple of small X's. I think it's time to replace that blade. And if you notice, I have removed the nut and washer from these. Okay, that'll hold them in place. Okay, so I've got some gloss black spray paint, no particular kind. And I've already shaken the can for well over a minute. And I'm not putting on a ventilator because this is just going to take a second, and then I'm going to leave for about an hour and a half, so not too worried about it. Just make sure there's no red showing. That's really the only thing I'm worried about. Okay, and I'm going to clear this, and I'll be back in about an hour and a half. So I'm back, and everything seems quite dry. Not that you can see much, but they're nice and shiny. And smooth. Now, I probably should have taken some fine sandpaper and roughed them up a bit first, but I think it's going to be fine even with me not doing that. So let's go ahead and put these in place. It's pretty straightforward. Pop it out of the top, put a washer on over it, and then drop on the nut. Easier said than done, of course. Okay, got it. And I want to tighten this as much as I can. Being careful not to scratch the new paint yet. I'll get around to that later. So, let's do one more time. Okay. Those are nice and tight, and we're done with that. Now all we have to do is worry about the back of this. And what this comes down to is I've got to figure out where to put the 9-volt battery. And the only place I can really think of is back here. So we're going to have to remove this back piece here. Now I don't really know how I'm going to pull that end piece off, so I've just got a few possible tools here. And I think what I'm just going to do is just try and do it and figure out what I'm doing here. First thing I need to find out is whether or not, I can't remember, if this is on the outside or if it's tucked in between the sides here. So it looks like maybe it's on the, stuck on the end, which is probably the best case scenario. This is just I don't know if it's considered it's called a painter's tool. It's like a putty knife, but it's a scraper. It's just called a painter's tool. Okay, so very gently. I'm not trying to just rip this off of here, because I don't want to destroy this whole thing. I just want this end piece to come off. And this is looking pretty good. Feels like maybe it's held on with hot glue. I can't remember. That would make sense because this would have been one of the last things I put on, and I think by that point I'd pretty much realized that super glue is not the best choice for this nylon. Okay, so that makes things a little easier. That came off really simple. So now what I need to do is to find a piece of wood that I can glue into the top half of this. Actually, now this is open, I've got a 9-volt battery here. And will it fit? And it's really bulging the side out, so it looks like we're gonna have to go sideways with it. I think it will fit, but it's closer than I'd hoped. But that does tell me how much room I've got up top, which is not a whole lot. Okay, I'm just going to measure this opening. I want it to be fairly precise. 63/64. You know, I guess I'm gonna have to clean this first. I'm trying to be lazy about this and be in a hurry, but just make sure there's not a little bit of a lip there. I want to get as accurate a measurement as I can, because I want to make sure that this is held securely. I guess I could go look at my old template and probably tell me exactly how wide that is, but okay, I'm going to say it's 1 1/16, 1 inch and 1/16 of an inch, which is just under 27 millimeters. 26.91. So let's cut up. Maybe just actually use this piece of wood right here. No, I'm not. So I'm going to get a piece of wood and I'm going to cut it to a width of 1 1/16 of an inch. Okay, I think I'm going to use a piece of solid wood instead of a particle board of some kind. So this is just a scrap of pine that wouldn't be good for much of anything, but since I only need the very end of it, this should work just fine, and I can definitely cut a piece out of it. So I'm going to basically cut the sides off of this and get a piece that's the right size. Okay, so I've cut this piece of wood and it's not remotely square, but that's okay. The sides should be square, and so they'll fit in here nicely. Now I need to figure out how much room I have here. And I'm just going to mark this. I'm going to give you a little bit of clearance. And I'm going to cut this bottom half of that off. Now here's this piece. And that works. So now I just have to worry about getting this angle right here so that it will actually fit even with the sides here. I'll push it up as high as I can, hold it in place, and make a mark. Might as well do both sides. And we'll go ahead and cut this off. Here is my piece of wood. Now that I've cut that out, I just cut it out with like a Japanese handsaw. Nothing precision about this. I just want to get it sort of in the right place. Get a fair amount on top. The only thing you have to be precise about is making sure that the battery will fit in underneath it. Make sure it's flush with the edges, but definitely not sticking out. Once that's good, I'm going to go ahead and put quite a bit here on top. And I'm going to wipe off any excess. Cleaning off all the old hot glue as well. Okay. Well, what we're doing is we're going to end up, we want to have a spot for a screw so that we can put a screw in here so that in order to open this, we'll be able to, you know, twist it open. Okay, so now we need to come up with the screw. Okay, I found this screw. Don't know what size it is or anything, but the important thing is it's flat down here on the bottom, so you don't want any kind of countersunk, you know, kind of a flared bottom down here. So like a wooden deck screw would be a bad idea at this point. You want some sort of machine screw type thing. This is a wood screw though, so that's also important. Let's see, what size? This is a 3/16, it looks like. So I'm going to go ahead and drill a hole through here that's 3/16 of an inch. Okay, so I found a 3/16 bit. And I need to go ahead and figure out where I'm going to put it on here, or the hole anyway. And I'm just going to slide it over so that I can see where the wood is. Okay. I'll use this scrap piece of wood to put underneath this, and I'm still going to go ahead and punch this just because this nylon is so difficult to work with. I guess what I should have done is to actually measure to find the middle, but I'm not terribly concerned about this because I'm hoping that it really won't be noticeable. But yeah, ideally if I'd measured that and put that right in the middle, it'd be better. Clean that out again. Now, if I had one of those little punches that fits into a hole to give you the precise center, I would do that, but I don't have one of those. So I'm just going to do that, and I did the dark lines around it, so the little light spot in the middle should be the middle. It's probably not super accurate, but it's close enough for what I'm doing right now. And the reason why we're drilling this is because I don't want to just try to put that wood screw into here, because I'm pretty sure it'll just split this piece of pine. So I'm going to go ahead and drill a little bit of a hole there. Not as big as this one, because we need something for the screw itself to grab into. So this is the bit that's a couple sizes smaller. If I use this as background, you might be able to see. And you can see that it covers up the shaft, but you can still see the thread on either end. Let's try this. So the shaft is got plenty of clearance, but the teeth should be able to dig in. I could probably go with one size smaller. In fact, yeah, I'm gonna go ahead and try one size smaller. I want this to be able to hold tight enough to keep the battery from falling out and for it to not spin around. So I need plenty of wood for the thread to dig into. Apparently I am missing that bit, so I'm going for the one size even smaller than that. So hopefully it'll still work okay. It does give me plenty of thread. Hopefully it's enough to not split the wood. And I want to, instead of drilling in like this, I want to go ahead and drill 90 degrees to this opening right here. So with that saying, it would have been better if I had made my hole closer to the top. I should have thought that through. I think this is going to work fine for me. It doesn't have to be heavily load bearing, but when you do it, I would try to make your hole toward the top of the piece of wood because we're going in at an angle here. The other thing you could probably, well, no, because the battery's got to go in there, so we can't make the wood any lower. So just have to make sure you use a short enough screw that it doesn't interfere with the battery. But now we should be able to secure this in place. Get a screwdriver. Okay. It'd help if you lock the ratchet in the right direction. Cross your fingers. I'm going to go gently. And I'm not liking, I get the sneaking suspicion that that has pulled free, or has split the wood, I should say, and it has. Okay, so what I think I'll do is I'll go with a larger drill bit and drill a larger hole in here, because I can't, unfortunately I can't move this hole higher up. But first things first, I'm going to go ahead and pull this out and start over again. So you don't have to watch that, but I'll be back in a minute. I've gone ahead and put a new piece in here. It's a little bit tighter grained wood, so that might help a little bit. Also, I made the hole a little higher up. It's going to make this a little bit sloppier than it would normally be, but it I think it's probably better to get the hole a bit higher up. I think I can make it tight enough that it'll still be good. So let's go ahead and make our mark again. I'm just going to eyeball it this time a little bit. That looks pretty good. Looks centered there, but on here it looks over to the Okay, go ahead and go with what I had. Sometimes you have to just believe in your measurements. Okay, so I've also gone with the larger drill bit again instead of that smaller one, so there'll be less of the thread biting into the wood, but you know, it's less likely to crack the wood. You know, I think I may actually punch this even though it's wood. It's a harder wood, and I don't want this moving around a lot. Okay. Let's give this a try again. Now this should be plenty big enough to hide that hole. There's a little bit of a gap. I've got a washer here. Maybe I'll try using that. Okay, so I've just got this little washer just to clean things up a little bit. I'll probably end up gluing it down so that it's not going to have a lot of this kind of thing. But for now, let's just see if this works. I ended up on the wrong setting again. It's very difficult to hold in position and film. Okay, that's on there pretty well, and once this is painted and everything, it won't be so strange looking. All right, and we can rotate that around to put our battery in place. Okay, and here's our battery along with the connector for the battery. And I'm kind of thinking now, after all this work, I think it can actually go in sideways, which means I could have used more wood, but you know. What I'm going to have to do though is I need to now make a little groove here on the side for the wire to feed through. So it's easy enough. I just want to mark roughly where I want it to be. And then go ahead and cut a little groove right in there. With this nylon that I've got, I think I'm going to play it safe and just cut it with this Dremel tool. I better get my eye protection because something about staring at the edge on of this thing spinning at high speeds is just seems like a bad idea. And that is that. Like I said, any little hand saw would have done that fine, especially with either a Sintra or wood, or you know, with foam you could have used a razor blade. This nylon is so difficult to cut that I think that was the best way to go. That fits, and went the wrong way, I think. Oh, the whole thing just slid down. Okay. Need to tighten this down a little bit. I think I loosened it when I twisted it. Okay. And there we go. And the wires come out the side. We're good to go. And I'll deal with painting that and it won't look so strange. But now we have a battery that we can run our light with. Okay, let's go ahead and glue this back on. I'm going to go ahead and use this side because I've got the big hole. I don't want to get a lot of glue there, or at least waste a lot of glue there. Make sure to get above and below this area. Okay. Make sure that the corners line up. I guess the front is more important than the back. And there should be, when you get kind of locked in place, there should be a lip. This should be lower than this. Front's a little further back than I would like, but it's not that bad, and we've already set up good, so it's not noticeable. It's going to be great. Okay. And now that we have this piece on there, I think permanently this time, I might put a little bead of hot glue running right down the middle here, but also might not. So I'm going to hold off on that for now. I'm going to make sure this still opens without interfering with that piece, and it does, so we're good there. Okay, so now we're finally ready to solder all these connections together. So you've got your plug for your 9-volt battery. These are the wires that go to the light. These are the 2 wires that go to the switch. And basically you just want to make sure you get a circuit that goes from one of the leads from the battery to one of the leads to the light, and then one of the leads to the light to one of the leads of the switch, and then one of the leads of the switch to the other lead of the battery. And we don't need this much wire either. For instance, say these 2 wires here from the light and the switch just have to connect together. So I'm going to cut both of those in half. You don't have to cut it too close, just because you can just, they're going to stick in here on the bottom and it'll be fine. They're not visible. I'm going to strip all these just between 1/4 of an inch and 1/2 of an inch, like the size of my fingernail is a good comparison. Once again, some of this extra wire here would have worked fine for the switch instead of those heavy gauge wires that I used before, but it's all gonna be fine. Now this red wire needs to meet up with this red wire, or with a wire to the battery. So it can be longer, but honestly, I don't need this much wire, so I'm going to cut some of this off. Strip these as well. And for that matter, this one only needs to go, it doesn't have to be as long as it is either. If you want, you can go ahead and take this plug and shove it into here and just pull the wires out through here, but it doesn't really matter, to be honest. I might as well cut this one short too, like everything else. Okay, I don't know what's easiest for y'all to see. I've also taken some electrical tape and just wrapped it around the jaws or the teeth on these little clamps, because I feel like sometimes they tear into the insulation on the wires. And so I'm going to start by soldering this black wire to one of the leads here on the light itself. And to do that, I'm going to bend the wire. Can you see this? I'm going to bend the wires 90 degrees, then hook them together, and then bend the wires back onto themselves so that you're not using the solder itself to keep the wires together. Also helps to wrap the wires around themselves. Okay, I've made them nice and short, but they maybe now be so short that I can't use my... That'll still work though. I just need to keep that tight. Oh, before I do that, whoa, that was close. An important thing we need to do first. That was almost a typical filming accident. I've got this shrink tubing. We need to cut this in half and feed a piece of it onto whichever wire is the longest. If it gets too close, it'll shrink up while you're soldering it, and you definitely don't want that. So these two will go together. I've made them fairly short, but we'll get by. So that's really quite close, and we may run the risk of this heat shrink shrinking down. What I might do is cut this a little smaller. That's still plenty to cover up the solder. Now let's start all over again. Sorry, this isn't the most interesting visually, but can you see that a little better? I'm sure those of you who solder all the time are probably yelling at the screen right now. Okay. I apologize for my sort of amateurish style. Push that over. Okay. Now this one does not go to this one. Going to push that to the side. Now we have the lead from the light to the switch. Once again, I just bend the wire around each other. Easier said than done with this solid core wire. I suddenly feel like I have large fingers. Wrap that around itself as well as I can, then I'm going to just smash this solid core copper wire down. Can you see that? Am I blocking it with my hand now, probably? Soldering, you always kind of need 3 or 4 hands. need to kind of flatten that out a little bit so I can get the shrink tubing over it. If you don't want to use shrink tube or don't have access to it, you can always just use electrical tape. It works just fine. Okay, now I've got this last wire from the switch hooking to the remaining wire that goes to the battery. There's some much better helping hands on the market than this, but I've had these for a long time. I just want to get that kind of all in line. By that, what I mean is the solid core copper was twisted around and kind of sticking out, and I know I wouldn't be able to get the shrink tubing over that, so I want to smash that to where it's a little bit more flat. So having a hard time getting this to wrap around itself. Let me see if I can just demonstrate what I'm trying to say here a little easier to see. So you take your wires and you sort of bend them at a 90-degree angle like that. Then you cross them and you bend them back onto themselves. And then if you can get them to wrap around, which is really easy when it's not all hooked together, but kind of hard when you're trying to twist everything else around it. Okay, so now you have a nice, tight, strong piece that's not going to come apart, and the solder itself is not the structural part. The solder just keeps everything together. Let's see if I come in this way. Okay. Let that cool off for just a second. And then I'm going to run this across the whole thing. Okay, hooked on that copper wire that I was worried about. I'm just going to split the very tip of this this heat shrink. There we go. All right, finally. Heat gun works on this. Also, you can just use your soldering iron to shrink that up. I prefer to use lighter. Okay. Now, if all is well, I should be able to plug my battery into that and it should work. Okay, we got a light and it turns off. So mission accomplished there. Unfortunately, I still have the bad connection that I had before. So I guess I'll have to use a rubber band. Okay. Now we have, it's not going to work because I don't have the rubber band on there, but Now what we have is all these wires that we need to deal with, so I think what I'm just going to do is push everything out of the way. And I'm just going to tape it up. Well, to be honest, I think I may just leave it, because when I finish this whole thing off, I'm going to put some foam in here, and that'll just cover all that up and keep it in place. So there's really no point in even putting tape on here. So I think I'll put rubber bands on my battery, and we'll be ready to go ahead and tackle the last little bit, which is this little hollow emitter on the front. Now we can go ahead and add the last little greebly on here, which is the hollow emitter that goes right here, which is this casting of a 1970s Casio calculator keyboard. And position wise, I want to go ahead and measure. My camera's in the way. Let's scoot this back a little bit. I want to go ahead and measure 1/4 inch from the end here. So make a couple marks so that I can draw a line between them. And I just want to draw a line running down this side of everything. And that's just so I'll know where to put this. Now, if you either have an old Casio keyboard from a calculator, it's the right one, then you can, or a casting made from one, then you can go ahead and put this on, and you want it to be with these little notches facing forward. If you don't have one, I'll go ahead and put a link to where I got this one, but sometimes you just can't find stuff on the internet. They're not in production at the moment, or for whatever reason you can't find one. A really good replacement, and something you should think about. This happens to be pretty much the same size as a 4x6 Lego, which is also just a bunch of little buttons sticking up. Of course, you'll want to sand off the little parts that say Lego on them, but it's not a bad replacement. But if you want to go a step further and think to yourself, this isn't supposed to be a bunch of buttons, it's supposed to be a hollow emitter. And this doesn't really look to me, especially this, to me it doesn't look like anything that's going to project a hologram. So what I did is I just flipped this over, and if you'll notice this piece, curves up. It's not just flat across or flat with a little fence on the side. It's flat, and then it kind of curves up on each end. So I took one of these and I sanded not only the logos but the entire bumps off of the back of this, which surprisingly leaves little holes in the back of it. And then I just took my Dremel and I dremeled the front and backs off of this. Took black marker and marked the inside of all of these. And you get what I think looks pretty good. It looks quite a bit like what should be, I would think, a hollow emitter. I'm a little bit torn as to whether or not I want to go this route, or if I want to go, the traditional Casio calculator route. And I'll probably go ahead and go, like a Casio calculator, just because that's the way it's supposed to be. But I'm really tempted to go this route, because this to me just makes more sense as to what it's supposed to be. But yeah, let's go ahead and just use this one. But before I glue this down, I need to remove some of this paint that might possibly make this not stick very well. So I'm just going to take some sandpaper and, you know, see if I can't, if not remove all of this, at least scuff it up enough that I'm quite sure that it'll stick. But there's really not much, you know, you don't need to see all this. So I'll be right back once I get this cleaned up a bit. So I've managed to sand off most of this primer, and then of course I went back and marked and redrew my line because of course sanded it off. Okay, so how to glue this on there? Probably the most secure way would be hot glue. The problem with that is it's I want this to be flush mount. I even toyed around with removing some of this material so that this would kind of fit down into it, but it really didn't. I did some testing and it really didn't look any better, maybe even a little worse. So I'd stop worrying about that. But I do want to make sure this is flat. I don't want this to be sticking up because there's hot glue underneath it. So I'm just going to go ahead and go with some gel super glue. So I went to the store and got some gel. Not sure 100% what this is, but I'm assuming that it's gluable or it would be a really bad choice of material. And we're back to the PVC material, the Sintra here, as opposed to the nylon over here. So I think this is going to glue pretty well. I'm going to try to make sure that I get these, you know, close to the, not the edge, but close to the part that's flat. You know, I don't much worry about getting over here, but I do want to get it in this edge of where the flat part is. And get enough material, but not so much that it's going to squish out everywhere. And let's see if I can actually get this to stick. Basically, I've got a line coming down here and a line coming across here at 1/4 of an inch. I want to kind of put this in that corner and lined up with the front edge, or probably this back edge is more important because I can always sand the front edge if I have to. Put a little bit of force into it. Okay, I'm gonna hit that with some zip kicker real quick. I'm sorry this is all blown out. Maybe I can get a little closer and maybe that'll... Okay. So now here we have this, and this brings up a little bit of a subject that's been bothering me this whole project, and that is that looking at pictures of this Vambrace, my proportions are just not there. But at the same time, this is the correct size and it's proportionate to all of this. This all seems to work just fine. So if I'd cut this part off, it would be a little bit closer to being proportioned, but it wouldn't fit on my arm very well. By adding the 1/4 inch more material over here, it really fits a lot better on my arm. But it's really confusing because when I look at pictures, this part here especially looks way too narrow here, way too small. But the reality is, it's the right size. So I don't know, maybe this is a little bit thicker. Maybe I could carve some of this out to make more room. At this point, I'm not terribly worried about it. But yeah, it is what it is. Like I've always said, I'm not trying to make this look exactly like the movie prop. I want it to look better than the movie prop and fit better and be comfortable when I'm, somewhere walking around in it. So that's what I'm trying to do. It kind of goes against the argument I made by using this, where I said, this is what is actually in the movie, so I'm going to use this, whereas maybe this might read a little better as a hollow emitter, but that just kind of shows you how close to the same size they really are. That's just, I had to make a decision, and that's the one I made. I think it's going to look great in the end, and it'll look, it may not be perfect, but it's going to look good, and I think it'll probably look better than the original. That kind of goes along with these little ridges that I put here. To be more film realistic, we'd probably go in there and sand everything from this smallest piece here and sand off all of these to where it's thinner in the back and just flush. And you can do that if you want. I like the way this looks, so I'm going to stick with this. Sometime down the line, if I see some stuff and it's just really obviously wrong, then maybe I can revisit that then and sand it down a little bit flatter. But at this point, I like it, and I'm going to stick with it. So this piece is in place now, and that's most of it. You'll notice the rocket is not here. I'm kind of keeping this on lockdown so it doesn't roll off and break. I want to go ahead and paint this separately and only attach it at the very end, but I will do something that'll keep it from being so apt to roll off the table every time I touch it. And that is, I'm going to go ahead and glue the attachment point where this is going to attach. I'll go ahead and glue that on so it's not so likely to roll around. What this is just a piece of 5mm EVA foam. The reason why I'm going with foam on this is I'm afraid with this sticking up so high, if it gets knocked, even with it being super glued in place, when it gets bumped, that's liable to break the glue and this is going to go flying. I think by using the foam, it'll be a little bit of a shock absorber and that'll kind of hold everything in place. That's my plan anyway. So, like I said, this is a 5mm thick piece of craft foam or EVA foam, and I'm going to cut a 3/8 thick piece off of this. That's probably what, 9? Yeah, that's about 9mm thick. So I'm going to cut this off and I'll be right back. Okay, so I just have this piece that I cut off, and I went ahead and hit it with the heat gun just to make sure that heat seal it a little bit. That's basically, I do that before I paint or do anything to EVA foam. And I'm just going to kind of lay this up here. And I'm just putting my finger at the end of this. So I'm starting at the beginning of this little piece and marking it with my finger at the end. Just taking some scissors. I'm going to cut it. So now that'll fit there nice. Just kind of center this piece up on here. And I'm just eyeballing this. This does not have to be precise. I mean, if you want to measure this, you can do that. That's fine. I'm just going to kind of eyeball it here because when I glue this down to here, I'll be able to kind of, make sure it's perfect on this part. And wherever this lines up, it's not going to be hugely off, but any, little bit that's off, it's not going to matter. I'm just going to mark a line on here so that it'll be easier to line up when I'm actually gluing it. And you know what I probably should do is go ahead and remove some of this paint right here so that we're down to the bare PVC. So I'm going to do that again real quick and be right back. Okay, so I've just sanded some of this off, and I didn't bother to go ahead and do the line. I can kind of see the edge of the line here, and actually this area that I sanded off should work just fine as a guide. And I'm going to just, once again, oh, there is actually glue coming out. And just eyeballing it again. I'm just trying to center it between this edge and this front edge, so it's a little bit smaller. Trying to gently give it some pressure so that it doesn't squirm around everywhere. That's mostly just to make sure I don't glue my hands to this thing. Okay, now when this drops into place, it'll fit nicely. And for now, the important thing is that it no longer will roll off the table. Okay, because we're going to paint this separate and then put them together at the very end. But I think that we're going to go ahead and stop here, and on the next video we'll go ahead and paint the whole thing. Here it is cleaned up a little bit. Now you might notice that beyond just painting this to cover up some of the areas where I put the hot glue on and to make everything tie in a little better, not look like just a piece of plastic, there's also this area right in here. I thought I was filming that when I put that on at the last minute, but apparently I was not. But don't freak out. That's let me see if I can zoom in a little bit here. That's really just a toothpick. I literally just took a toothpick and some sandpaper and held it down and flattened one part of it so that it had a little bit of a flat end on it, and then I cut it into a 3/4 inch piece and 2 1/4 inch pieces, and using the gel super glue I just super glued them with the 3/4 inch piece in the middle and a 1/4 inch piece, or I'm sorry, a 1/2 inch piece at the bottom and a 1/2 inch piece at the top. And then I just took this little piece here and I just ran it right in the middle to make a little round divot right in the middle, and that's all I did. So you didn't really miss much. I don't think you'll have any problem with that. This of course is also not attached because we're going to paint that separately. It'll be a lot easier to do if it's not attached already. Guess we should turn the light on. But so it looks a little bit better now than it did when it was just a hodgepodge of pieces and everything. But in the next video we'll go ahead and get to doing the proper job of priming this. This is just like a quick layer I threw on there so that everything would not be different colors and different materials. This makes it look a little bit more cohesive. The next video I'll go ahead and properly fill it and prime it and smooth it, and then we'll get to painting it. So we're almost done with this one. I hope you enjoyed it. If you liked this video or found it helpful, why not go ahead and give it a thumbs up? And of course, subscribe so you don't miss out on any of the upcoming videos. You can also click that little bell so you'll be instantly notified when new videos come out. As always, if you have any comments or questions, please leave them down below in the comments section and I'll do my best to answer them. You know, it's really your likes, comments, and subscriptions that motivate me to keep this channel going. So, until next time, thanks.